I put my sermon for today on these two note cards here. I'm not going to do one like I've done before. I have it like my kind of messages I would normally preach, because you're at a very special time in this church, very, very special time. And I wanted to do a sermon for you. I wanted to do one that I thought would fit kind of where you are in the journey of this congregation. So the title of the message is "Now is the Time." And the reason that I think that's an important message is because there's a tendency for you, and there's a tendency for me to get on our new facility and our new property and begin to high five and say, "This is good." And there's a tendency just to kind of maybe relax and just kind of pull back and say, "Wow, we've worked hard. We really have. We've worked hard." How many of you have been in this church for 5 years or longer? Would you raise your hand for me? Several of you. Okay. Well, most of you are tired. You know what I'm saying? You're just kind of tired. You've worked hard, and you set up and you've put down, and the whole process week after week, and have been in facilities that weren't always what you would want them to be. Certainly not what these are. And there's a tendency, there's just a human tendency for us to kind of want to lay back now a little bit and not maybe seize the moment. We all have procrastination issues, don't we? Huh? How many of you have ever procrastinated at least once in your life? Today. We all have. We all know what that's like to kind of, I'll get around to it. And what I want you to do is understand that at this time, at this moment, now is the time. In a moment, I'm going to talk to you about three things that I think are very important for this moment. But biblically, on the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus one time when he was talking to the crowd on the sermon, he said, "Pay close attention to what God is doing right now." In fact, when he spoke about paying close attention to what God is doing right now, he went on and said, "And don't get worked up about what may or may not happen in the future." In other words, Jesus was saying, don't miss the moment. He was basically saying, seize the moment, enjoy the moment, minister in the moment, do it now. Don't somehow think that tomorrow is going to be the time when you go. When I wrote the book Today Matters that I have here, many of you have read that book. And when I wrote that book, I basically said we over-exaggerate yesterday, we overestimate tomorrow, but we underestimate today. And I think that is the key. I think we have a tendency to kind of look at it, especially now that we've, quote, arrived, and kind of say, well, boy, the Church of the Highlands, this is amazing, and we're here, and it's wonderful, and I'm just going to kind of sit back, and I'm going to kind of enjoy the moment. And I don't want that to happen here. I want us to begin to understand that we need to initiate. We need to move forward. In my book, Talent is Never Enough, I have a chapter on initiative. I basically say initiative activates talent. Initiative is almost like the ignition switch of talent. It gets us going. It gets us moving. And initiative is so important in your life and in my life, and especially in the life of the church right now. I was having dinner about a year and a half ago, with Gail Devers and her husband and their little daughter. Gail Devers, if you follow Olympic history in sports, you know that she is the only woman in Olympic history to win medals in 4 different games. I mean, that's a span of 12 years, 4 different Olympic games. And what's amazing, she's 41, and she's now training for Beijing. In fact, I read in Canada the other day, she was in a race in Canada, and she won the race. I mean, she's racing against girls that are young enough to be her daughter. So I'm spending this amazing evening with this gifted athlete, and she's telling me about all the records she set, and I'm just asking questions. And finally, close to the end of dinner, I decided to shock her. And so I said, Gail, I said, it's amazing what you've accomplished, but I honestly think that if you and I were in a race, like a 100-yard race, I think I could win. Now, that's a bad attitude you folks are displaying right now. In fact, that's what she was doing. She was kind of snickering the same way you're snickering, because, and she kind of gets this disbelief on her face, and she looks at this body, and Now she's in shock, you know. I just want you to know under this fat body is a well-honed athlete. A has-been. And so I could tell that she didn't believe I could win that race. And I said, Gail, I really could. I could win that race. I could beat you in 100 yards if you gave me an 85-yard head start. Now, I want you to know I carefully calculated 85 yards. I thought about saying 80, but I'm not sure I could win if I had an 80-yard. I said, but at 85, I could stumble over. I promise you. And of course, now you're saying, of course you could win, John. Anybody could win a race against the fastest lady maybe in the world if you had a head start. That's exactly what I want you to know. I want you to know that it's not the fastest person that's highly successful. It's the first one. Initiative gives you a huge advantage. And what I want for you at this church, I want you to understand now is the time. Now's the time to do some things that are going to really make a difference. And there are 3 things I want you to write down today that fit under the heading, now is the time. Number 1, now is the time to be grateful. Now's the time. There's no time better than now to be grateful to God, to be grateful to the leadership of the church, to be grateful that you're a part of this church. There's not a better time for you to express gratitude than right now. I was doing a corporate setting recently, and I was speaking a little bit about gratitude and valuing things and people. And I made a statement that I want you to write down, and that is what you appreciate appreciates. In other words, the more you appreciate it, and the more you express appreciation for it, and the more that you express gratitude to it, it appreciates and gets of more value to you. And so therefore, we really can appreciate or give increased value to those around us if we appreciate them. Just as the opposite is also true, what you and I depreciates, and because of less value. And now is the time of the Church of the Highlands to absolutely express gratitude to God, to the leadership team, of what has happened in this church. Because this is phenomenal. I want you to understand, there are not 5 churches in America that could tell your story. There aren't 5 churches in America that have had the growth you've had in the last 7-8 years. There are not 5 churches in America that have been able to do what you have been able to do in America. This is a unique church. I was coming from Atlanta Friday evening over here. I was driving. I had a couple days of doing business over there with my companies, and I was coming 20, and I was on the phone doing business the whole way, talking to people, and then I got to that 4 whatever it is out here, and I knew I needed to turn left, so I'm now coming this way, but I'm thinking, boy, I wonder if I'm getting close to my area, and just about the time I'm wondering, I can't hang up on this call yet, and I'm kind of thinking, I hope I'm not too lost. I see over on the left-hand side this big church sign, Church of the Highlands right here, and I thought, oh my God. I'm in the neighborhood. Oh, it's a great sign. I mean, when the rapture comes, Jesus is going to come to the sign and come right on over. It's going to be amazing. and I just want you to know, again, Chris doesn't want me to do this, and I didn't ask his permission because you can't ask permission. He might tell me no. And then I do it anyway, and that is not good for friendships. So I just don't ask his permission. I just do what I want to do. Besides, I'm older, and I'm his mentor, and that's the great privilege of mentoring. Just shut up and take it, son. But I'm here to tell you. I know churches and I know pastors across America, and I think you know this, but I don't know that you know this. But if you don't know this, you really need to know this. There is not a better church leader, pastor in America than Chris Hodges, what you have here in this church. You do understand. Chris and Tammy, oh my goodness, Tammy, aren't they wonderful? Huh? Oh my God. Phew. I look at Chris, I'm amazed at the favor God gives him. I'm amazed at his giftedness. I'm amazed that Tammy would marry him. I mean, look at him. I mean, he married way above himself. I mean, we all talk about it, don't we? We all just, that's Pastor Chris, the guy that married way over him, so, Over in Georgia, we have a phrase for that. When somebody marries over themselves, we say they outpunted their coverage. It's very obvious, Chris, you outpunted your coverage, but that's all right. It takes one to know one. So did I. I had to be a real salesman myself. But I'm here to tell you, you are incredibly blessed with a senior pastor, leadership team like you have. And I think the whole leadership team, everybody that's just absolutely making it happen for the church, I think we ought to give them all a hand. It's just incredible. Now's the time just to express that gratitude. And to each one of you, I mean, you people have paid the price. You have sacrificed financially. You have invited people and friends, and that's how this church is growing. So take a moment and look at your neighbor and tell him, hey, way to go. Give him a high five, okay? Congratulate the people around you. Go, way to go. This is good. Now's the time to express gratitude. Here's what I do. I went on my 60th birthday. I turned 60 in February. I had a friend of mine who sent me a picture of a turtle sitting on the top of the fence post with just the statement, when you see a turtle on top of a fence post, realize he didn't get there by himself. Boy, isn't that true about this church? It's been everybody's effort. But you have such a great live church. Do you realize there are a lot of churches that aren't live? You know that. Some of you came from them. Yeah. Dead churches. You know what I'm talking about? Just dead. I wrote this down one time. There's a difference between live churches and dead churches. Live churches always have parking problems. Boy, isn't that the truth? You get in line, everything crowds. Dead churches don't have any parking problems. No, in fact, if you go to a dead church, you can park by the front door. Shoot, if that door's wide enough, you can drive your car right in that sucker, you know what I mean? Yeah. Park by the communion table, you know what I mean? Communion on the go, whatever, hello. That's not in the notes anywhere. Live churches have a lot of noisy kids, huh? Isn't that true? Dead churches don't have any. Dead churches are quiet, yeah. Live churches are constantly growing and planning for the future. Dead churches worship the past. Live churches grow so fast they don't know everybody's name. Dead churches, they know everybody's name. There's Bill, Sally, and Joe. That's it. You know what I mean? Us three and no more, huh? Dead churches move out in faith, or live churches move out in faith. Dead churches walk totally by sight. Live churches support missions heavily. Dead churches keep all the money for themselves. Live churches are filled with tithers, and dead churches are filled with tippers. Whew. Live churches dream great dreams for God. Dead churches relive nightmares. Live churches make a difference, and dead churches don't. And you happen to be in a very vibrant live church, unlike very few even in America. And I know you're grateful for it. Let's one more time before I go to point number 2. Let's express our gratitude to God for what He has done here. It's amazing what is. Number 2. Now is the time to let God do a great work in your life. Now's the time, right here at this part of your journey as a congregation. Now it's a great time to let God do a work in your life. And you may even say, John, I'm a little surprised with that comment. I would think that you'd say now's a great time for us as a church to do a great thing in the community. And I'm going to come to that in a moment. But can I tell you something? You can't do a great work for God until God's done a great work in you. It starts with us. Isn't that true? You see, when God does a great work in me, then all of a sudden, He can begin to do a great work through me. And so it really begins with God doing something great. And now is the time for every one of you to step up spiritually. I mean, every one of us. I'm talking about from the pastor right on. Now's the time to really step up spiritually in your life. If you've ever wanted to get closer to God, if you've ever wanted to use your spiritual gifts for God, now's the time to really begin to move that way. So how do we let God do a great work for us in our life? 3 things, 3 words that are key to God doing a great work in your life or a great work in my life. The first word is brokenness. If God is going to do a great work in your life or my life, He first has to break us down. Life is tough itself, and all of us through life, as we grow older, get broken. Have very difficult things happen to us. And what I discovered a long time ago is if I do my own thing and I let life break me, doing my own thing, it breaks me in all the wrong places. But if I let God break me, He breaks me in all the right places. He knows what it's like to wrestle with me like He did Jacob. And He knows how to mark my life. Yes, how to touch me and break me, but He knows how to do it in such a way that it will allow me to blossom and allow me to be who I really want to be. But it always starts with what I call the breakdown process. Several years ago, I've gone through this broken times probably 15 times in my life as a Christian. Many years ago, I can remember I got to a place where I needed to be broken because I was beginning to be a little bit independent. I was beginning to be a little bit self-assured. And the passage, remember Jesus said, "Without me you can do nothing." I used to look at that passage and say, well, that's really not true. There's a lot of things I can do without God. And in fact, I kind of took great pride. In fact, I'll get this done and I'll do this. And it was kind of like I only give the hard stuff to God. You know what I mean? And I'll do all the other stuff. And I kind of made a list of all things I could do without God. And one day God said, yes, true. John, you can do all those things without me. But He said, let me tell you something. None of those that you can do without me have any eternal consequences. There's no eternal value there. In other words, yeah, you can do all that stuff, but it's wood, hay, and stubble. But if you're going to do something that has eternal value, then, John, you're going to have to include me in your life. And I tell you, it really broke me. I just got humbled, and I began to think, nothing can live beyond me unless it has the touch of God on it. Touch of God on me, touch of God upon what I say and do. So it begins with brokenness. But if God's going to do a great work in your life and in my life, it goes secondly to submission. Submission is just very simply stop insisting upon having your own way. Submission is all about the fact that I give up my rights and I let Him become Lord of my life, and I truly let Him call the shots. Now that's hard for a choleric. I like to call the shots. I like to be the quarterback of my own life. And submission means that I basically understand that God will be calling the shots for me and that I need to submit myself to Him. I don't know if you've ever done this before, but when I pray, sometimes I'll get a piece of paper out and I'll get a pen. At the top of the paper, I'll put my prayer request. I'll kind of write it down. And then because God is so busy, I often will write down some suggestions of how He can answer my prayer. Have you ever done this? How many of you have ever tried to help God answer your prayer? Could I say this? Okay, yeah, okay. You're just like I am, aren't you, huh? And so I'll give God my prayer request, and then I'll say, now, and God, I would suggest the following. And it's kind of like God is in heaven, and I'm throwing these suggestions out at Him, and He's up in heaven, and He's leaning over, and He's saying, that is so good. That is so good. John, slow down. Okay. I want to get every word. I don't want to. Please, be patient with me. Repeat that one more time. I want to get that. Yes. Why have I never thought of that before? Now, I've done this hundreds of times. And can I tell you something? Not one time has God taken any of my suggestions. He doesn't want my suggestions. Submission means I quit suggesting. What he wants is my obedience. And that's number 3. It begins with brokenness, submission, and obedience. And that truly is, my friend, the process of how God begins to do a great work within your life and a great work within my life. It's like John chapter 2, when Jesus did the miracle at Cana of Galilee, and Mary came to the servants and said, whatever he tells you to do, do it. That has always been my obedience first. Whatever Jesus tells me to do, I'm going to do it. And in that case of the water being turned to wine, they had never seen a miracle before. But just whatever he says to you, do it. They didn't understand the process. That's okay, but whatever he says to you, do it. Never try to explain God until you first obeyed him. There's so many Christians, they try to explain God and they don't do the obedience thing. People all the time come to me and say, John, how can I know God's will for my life? Come on, what do I need to know about the next 20 years of my life? What's God's will for my life out there? And I say, you don't need to know what God's will for your life is out there 10 years. You don't need to know what God's will for your life is from 10 days from now. It's very simple. Obey God today. Live in obedience to God's will today. And he'll take care of all the rest of the process. So many Christians have destination disease. Just let him break you, submit to that, and then learn to be obedient. As I said earlier, I turned 60 this year, and so last part of last year, I wrote a prayer for me to pray every day during my 60th year. And I decided I wanted to write a prayer that would stretch me, a prayer that I'm certainly not yet arrived to or have not yet lived up to, that's for sure. So here's what I wrote. And I tell you, when I pray this prayer, I just realize how far I yet have to go spiritually in my own life. But here's my prayer. Lord, as I grow older, I would like to be known as available rather than a hard worker, compassionate more than competent, content not driven, generous instead of rich, and gentle over being powerful, a listener rather than a great communicator, loving versus quick or bright, reliable, not famous, sacrificial instead of successful, self-controlled rather than exciting, and thoughtful more than gifted. I want to be a foot washer. Basically, this prayer is my feeble attempt, and it's truly a feeble attempt, to let God do a great work in me. And here's why. You see, now's the time to be grateful. Now's the time to let God do a great work in your life and in my life. Why? Number 3, now's the time to work together to fulfill the mission of this church. In other words, now is the time to let God do a great work through us by fulfilling the mission he has for us, which is the last words of Jesus, the Great Commission, to win the lost, to become involved in small groups where you can develop strong relationships, to equip people to do the work of the ministry, to find your spiritual gift, what it means to be part of the dream team and become leaders to really make a difference in your community. That's what it all means. In fact, I would like to take a moment, because you're doing such a good job taking notes, and this is such a joy to teach you. I would like for you at this stage of your note-taking to put on your paper there, now is the time for me to. And in a moment, I'm going to ask you to fill out the blank. Now's the time for me to what? Well, for some of you, maybe now's the time for you to receive Christ and develop a relationship with him. For some of you, now's the time for you to take your spiritual gifts and use them in ministry in one way or another in this church. Maybe now's the time for you to get in a small group. Maybe now's the time for you to join together and get on the leadership team. Perhaps now's the time for you to step up financially You know, you go to a church, and because of Chris's great leadership ability, he never lets this church get in a crisis. I've watched him. And the buildings you have and the property you have, it's just amazing what you have. But one of the reasons you have it is he's never overloaded you. He's never overstepped his bounds. He's been a good steward of the dollars that you have brought in tithes and offerings into this church. And it's very unlike a lot of churches, they're always in a crisis mode. I mean, you go and the pastor's getting up and said, boy, we got to have a big offering today. We don't have a big offering today, you know, where our land's not, we're going to get our land, or the bills aren't going to be paid. And many of you probably gone to church where they're just always asking for money. Isn't it wonderful to go to a church that teaches stewardship and teaches that you should tithe and teaches that you should be a good steward, but doesn't always ask for money? Huh? It's kind of unique, isn't it? But it's because Pastor Chris has made sure you never get overloaded financially. You don't take on more than you can handle. You don't get over your head financially. He's very good steward of that. But can I tell you something? Just because there's never a financial crisis in the church doesn't mean there's not major financial needs. And some of you, God's blessed financially. And some of you, you've not yet stepped up. And I just want you to know, for all of you, you ought to all begin to learn to trust God in becoming what I call a tithing Christian. That's just a commandment of blessing for every Christian, every believer. God says, if you'll do this, I'm going to open up the windows of heaven. I'm going to take care of you unbelievably. So that's for every believer. But for some of you, now might be the time to step up with a major financial gift to this church. You just say, boy, I want to be, because we got to build more buildings. We got to do so many things. Chris would never, ever want me to say this or ask this for you. When I'm done, I'm leaving town. But listen to me, my friend. For some of you, now's the time to financially step up. For some of you, now's the time to commit to Christ. For some of you, now's the time to get in a small group. Okay, I'm going to stop here for a moment because you got your little thing in there. How are you going to fill in your blank? Now is the time for me to what? Fill it in. And let me tell you something. While you're filling it in right now, I'm going to encourage you in the next 7 days, whatever you put in that blank, find out through the church how you can get involved in that way. You know, there's always people that will direct you and help you into a small group, help you get into leadership training so you can be part of the dream team. There's always people that can help you through that process. If you maybe you're checking right now, now's the time for me to become a Christian. The church is always ready to help you. But now's the time. The challenge for all of us is this is the moment, this is the season. Let's step up. Let me boy, I'm so thrilled. I'm just watching you write. I'm just watching you sitting there, and now's the time. And many of you are making some pretty major personal commitments right now. God's blessed for that. You'll be blessed. Let me close with this story. In Switzerland, there are some mountains that can be climbed by people like you and me. We got to get a little bit better condition, but I mean, it's not like the mountain climber mountains that would be way beyond our skill level. But some of these mountains that can be climbed by you and me, it takes a day to get to the top, and then you camp up there and you come down the next day. And on many of these places in Switzerland where you can do that, about halfway up the mountain is what they call the halfway house, halfway up the mountain. So a group of people starts off with a guide in the morning, and about noon, you're kind of tired, and you've been walking now for 4 or 5 hours, and you're coming up to the halfway house, and it's just it's a wonderful sight. Because as soon as you enter in the halfway house, you can smell the food, and they're getting ready for a good lunch, and you sit down, there's a fire in the fireplace, and there's nice soft chairs, and you can just rest your body and refresh your body. And so the people go into the halfway house, and they eat and laugh and enjoy and just really just kind of take in that wonderful, refreshing atmosphere. About an hour and a half after being in the halfway house, the guide gets up and says, well, gang, it's time to put on your gear. We got to hike. We got to get on up to the top. This is a fact. About half the people decide not to go on up to the top. They're sitting around the table and they're just saying, you know what, go on up. You're going to be coming by here tomorrow. You're going to be having lunch here again tomorrow. We're just going to hang here. And so the people that want to get to the top, they put their stuff on and they kind of leave. And the rest of the people sit behind. They eat a little bit more food, get around the piano, sing some songs, get around the fireplace, enjoy the fire, warm themselves by the fire. And all play games all afternoon, kind of enjoy themselves. But about 4:30, 4:45 in the afternoon, without anybody saying a word, the people who stayed in the halfway house, they slowly go over to where the window is, the big window, and they start looking outside, and they start looking up at the top of that mountain, and as they look at the top of that mountain, they see their friends. Their friends are now getting the tents out, and they're getting ready to prepare for the night, and it becomes very quiet, very somber. Because everybody in the halfway house realizes the mistake they've made. They've sold their mission for a little bit of comfort for a few hours. Next morning, down come their friends, and by noon, they come into the halfway house. And when they come in the halfway, they are laughing, they're high-fiving. They're talking about what they've seen, where they've been, experiences, the fact that it was almost impossible to get up there. In fact, they had to help each other get up there, and how they joined teams and held hands. And they're just telling all these stories and talk about the pictures they've taken. And they got the group picture up there with the flag at the top. And the people who remain behind, they don't say much. They just eat their lunch and then follow the rest of them down to the bottom of the hill where their friends are waiting for them. And those who paid the price and went to the top, who understood now is the time to reach the mission, they hug and tell stories and celebrate. And the others, they just kind of slip off and get in their car and go home because they realize they're never going to be what they wanted to be. They're never going to see what they wanted to see. They're never going to do what they wanted to do because they failed to realize when they're at the halfway house, now's the time to rest, and they go on. In the Church of the Highlands, this facility, this property, it's the halfway house. It's a great place to come on Sunday and be refreshed, or come during midweek and get spiritual food. It's a great place to be trained. It's a great place to be equipped. It's a great place to have friends. It's a great place to see one another. There's just a lot of wonderful things about this beautiful facility, but it is a halfway house. And your mission isn't accomplished by sitting here on Sunday. You see, now is the time, my friend, to engage yourself spiritually, physically, mentally, financially, and really become the church that God destined Church of the Highlands to be when He birthed it in Chris and Tammy's heart. And I know that's what you're going to do. Now is the time. Thank you very much.